Hey everyone, this is Kate from Moonflower Moments. Welcome and welcome back. Today I'm here to film my final installment of my tarot collection series of 2025, and this is going to be all of the decks that I use during my darker months of the year. So we're thinking like October all the way to February. So I do tend to experience seasonal affective depressive disorder during that time period, and so I rely on decks like the Architect's Tarot to help carry me through that, because I need decks that are a little bit brighter and a little bit lighter. So this is a theme that we're going to see carried out throughout this video. A lot of my decks that have a lot of intense white space are featured in this section. So the Architect's Tarot is one of my favorite decks of all time. I think that it is a perfect air deck. I tend to use a lot of air decks during those cooler months. There's something about the kind of crispness that was not very crisp me saying it, but the crispness, damn it, I still didn't say it, crispness, and the kind of cutting edge of the air that really puts me into a space to where I feel like I can engage in like deeper discussion and deeper thought. Because I do live in a place where the heat is oppressive most of the year, I kind of look to those winter months for engaging with some of the more like philosophical ideas. Because quite frankly, it's too hot to lay around and just like read books during the summer. A lot of that study and more intensive thought is given to those darker months. And I think the Architect's Tarot puts me in that space completely. I mean, this is essentially drafts, right? Like an architect would do drafting. And so it's nice to kind of see laid out on the table part of a process, because it kind of helps engage me in those mental processes as well. So this is one of my favorite decks. I had to start off really strong with one that I use all the time. This is the Architect's Tarot. I have a walkthrough of that on my channel if y'all are interested in seeing any of the cards. I think it was actually a first impressions. I was just so excited to get that deck, I had to share it with y'all. All right, so carrying on that theme, and there are a lot of water decks in this section, is going to be my Spirit Keepers Tarot, the Revelations edition. This is a really special deck to me because my husband, who is a triple air sign, is someone who really appreciates the work of Bidabel Wynn. And so when I was first getting started, I was reading Holistic Tarot. I was listening to Bidabel Wynn speak quite a bit. And so this was kind of the foundation of my tarot journey. And my husband, when the pre-orders were released for this deck, both me and him got one of this deck. And we oftentimes will come together. Our anniversary is in October, so we always use it in October, which is one of the darker months, of course, to kind of just like check in on our marriage and say, hey, what's going on with each of us? What's going on within like the shared space that we hold for each other? And work forward for the rest of the year with the messages that we receive during that time. And so it's very foundational. It's very pivotal to me. But separate from the readings that I do with him, I enjoy this deck once again for deeper kind of philosophical thought. During those darker months, I feel like I have a longer attention span when the heat is not oppressive. And so because Bidabel Wynn has created this with so much research, I mean, there is a massive compendium, I cannot talk today, y'all. Compendium to it, which I believe is like over 1,000 pages. I'm kind of looking at it now on my bookshelf, and there's even a workbook that goes along with it. I'm able to dip my toes a little bit more easily into that space when it is just cooler outside and there's a lot less going on in that darker half of the year. So this was the Spirit Keepers Tarot by Bidabel Wynn. All right, next I'll throw in a fun one that no matter how much I bitch about it, I can't seem to get rid of it. And this is my Goblin's Market Tarot. This was one of the earlier decks that I got, and it was the deck that taught me that I need to watch walkthroughs before I purchase decks. So it was the first and last deck that I ever bought blind. So I do struggle with this artwork quite a bit because this is Seven of Crowns, and if you actually look at the artwork, the shapes of the people are meant to kind of mimic the seven. So this is seven, you can see seven here. But other than that, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to get from the artwork, right? And the guidebook is a little kind of off the beaten path. Like, let me actually look this up. So crowns is swords, and this is what the guidebook has to say about this particular card. So you can even see here that the upside is going to be hope, new plans, perseverance, self-belief, realization of dreams. Whereas the downside is advice, instruction, wander, or slander. So I'm not quite sure where some of the meanings come from. I've tried my best to see this deck maybe from a numerological bend or perhaps an elemental bend, but I think it completely does its own thing in so many ways. And so it's not the easiest deck for me to work with, I feel like, in that sense. But I do dip my toes into it every once in a while because my ancestral line is very German. And even though this is not like German artwork by any means, it's kind of like whimsical, similar to some of the artwork that my grandmother had hanging up in her house. And so I've used this to communicate with that German lineage. And I think because I used this deck for that one time, that I really did some very long, extensive readings. I mean, we're talking about weeks and weeks of just channeling ancestral messages that I can't seem to give this deck up. But see, like, that's 5 of Crowns here. And you can very clearly see the 5, but like, what does the picture have to do with the 5 of Crowns? I don't know. So this one is not my favorite in my collection, but I keep keeping it for some reason. So that was the Goblin Market Tarot. All right, next I have another mass market deck, and this is going to be Ink Intuition. I've spoken before on this channel that I'm a really huge fan of tattoos. I would love to get more once my finances settle a little bit. And so I'm just very innately drawn to this imagery. Once again, we're seeing that correlation of this white space. I feel like this is the absolute perfect December and January deck because not only is it loaded with white space, it has a very limited color palette, but it also is pip. And so it's like, it's kind of the rawest of tarot imagery I think that you can see. Like, here you go, here's your answer. It's very precise, it's very in your face. And I feel like that matches the kind of cuttingness of very, very deep winter very appropriately for me. So I'd like to use this deck more in the coming year. It's one that kind of doesn't get a lot of use in my collection, but I know that I do enjoy the guidebook. I've enjoyed working with it. And so I'm just waiting for those experiences to come around. So that was Ink Intuition. Here are the backs. Sorry, I never show the backs, guys. I'm not a queen of showing the backs, but if y'all ever want to see the backs, just let me know. I don't ever mind taking a picture. All right, next I have a US Games mass market deck, but this one is out of print. And that is going to be Tarot of the Cloisters. My best friend gave this to me for Christmas because both of us have an affinity for stained glass. And I was really happy that she was able to get this for a pretty affordable deal on eBay. It doesn't go for crazy prices, even though it's out of print. So I really like a soft color palette during the darker times of the year. Once again, like, my mental state is not the greatest. And so I need to have some of these more pastel tones that are calmer to kind of calm my nervous system a bit. So I've used this for a variety of readings. I tend to use it to check in with my relationship with my best friend a lot and to check in with her a lot, just because it has that special correlation with her. But I have used it for more general style readings with absolute success. This is just one of those good, like, solid RWSs to have in your back pocket. That really, if you tend to use your deck seasonally like I do, matches that darker time of the year quite appropriately well. It can even be for like earlier spring if you wanted. So I think this feels a lot more like February to me if I had to assign it a month. So this is Tarot of the Cloisters. I do think the people's faces are hilarious in this deck. Like, look at that. I mean, it's just funny, y'all. Like, the faces of the people are, there you go. It was early artwork, y'all. Early tarot. All right, next I got a swifty little indie oracle. This one's going to break from the color palette of the brightness a little bit. And this is the Runic Odyssey. I'm going to try to hold this up and make sure that it catches the light so you can see it. So I really like this deck a lot. It follows the runic traditions. I think it makes for a stunning little generic reader. It also has the moon phases in it, which I found to come up quite a bit when I'm reading for clients. And it's interesting too because you can actually look here in the background, and what is happening in the background of the image is actually very directly related to the keywords that are depicted. So wisdom and communication, we can see like a hermit's lamp, almost like a lantern, and then a crow, or even a raven. So I like this little deck. It looks really beautiful under the candlelight, which is why I'm going to regulate it to the darker half of the year. I do a lot of my candlelight readings in the darker half of the year because the sun sets so early. I like to have a little bit of lighting on my table, and this is very nostalgic for me during that time of the year. It's when it tends to get the most use. Now, that being said, I don't want to reinforce here that like you have to buy decks for specific times of the year. I just find that my tarot practice, it tends to be where it's at. Look at that, I love this. I really, really, really love this card. So that was my Runic Odyssey. I have the pocket edition. It goes in and out of print. So if you're waiting on it, I would just wait for it to come back around. All right, next back to the white deck world, the decks with a lot of white space. This is the Tarot of the 78 Doors. I've used this one in client readings quite a bit during the winter. Oh, I love that. Look at that. It does have a few like wintry-esque cards to it. But I like this a lot because it mostly endeavors like upon portal work. And I do find the lighter half of the year tends to be when I do some of those more deeper readings, some of those more slow, methodical readings. And so it's an interesting concept to think that because every card in this deck is portrayed with a door, to thinking of like the coming and the going. And I think when we're in the midst of winter in particular and we are preparing for spring, it's a very apt and appropriate time for us to contemplate the beginnings and endings of our lives. So this is the Tarot of the 78 Doors, which has this weird mix of kind of like more modern, well, I guess modern for when the deck was made, and then more like old school images. It's a funny one. It's a funny one for sure. So that was Tarot of the 78 Doors. Carrying on with that idea that I really like to do some deeper work during the winter months, I would like to share with y'all an oracle deck that I love, and this is the Spread deck, the Shadow Work edition. I'm actually going to keep this here so you can see more than one card at once. So I think it goes without saying that a lot of people do shadow work during that darker time of the year. I think because people, like, life just tends to slow down a little bit. Summer tends to be more busy, but the darker half of the year, people have a lot more time to spend with engaging with those parts of themselves. And so I like this deck to help me create spreads around that. I don't exclusively use this deck during the darker halves of the month, of the year, but I wanted to include it in this because I think it tends to be when most people do shadow work. I like that we have a variety of things here, but I like that a lot of the concepts are not necessarily like written in a way that is going to trigger you. So like you have inner battle, which could be more serious for some people, but then you also have words like balance, your soul journey, courage, achievements, fear. And actually, the more that I look at this, the more that I realize that I think I need to use this deck like today. I have some stuff that is definitely coming up, and I'm going to leave this out of my desk to use it. So this was the Shadow Work edition of the Spread deck. All right, next I have the Thoth Tarot. I think everybody's seen like a plain Jane Thoth, so I won't spend too much time with this. I'm going to include this on my darker half of the year deck list, even though I have not used it very often, because all of the times I feel called to work with Thoth have been like in the very depths of the darker half of the year. I think that there is a rawness and a kind of sort of like primal power that floats around during that time of year that I think is very reminiscent of Thoth. It's a very serious deck, and I think that it needs to be approached with that sense of somberness that we oftentimes can only get during those months in which we are resting. So this was my copy of the Thoth deck. Like I said, everyone's seen that, I think, at this point, if they've been around tarot for a while, so I won't show too many cards of that one because we have a big list to get through. Now here's a happy one that I tend to use during the darker half of the year, but this is one that gets a lot of use all the time as well. That's going to be my fifth Spirit Tarot. For similar reasons, you know, it's white, it's pippy. So I won't recount all of that, but I will say that this deck feels like an absolute warm hug. And so when I'm really kind of in the depths of some of my more emotional spirals, some of my more emotional overwhelm, this is the deck that I want to turn to give me that warm hug. So she gets a lot of time on this channel, on TarotTube in general, and I think that if you're on the cusp of getting this deck, it's definitely worth the purchase. So not to influence you too much, but hopefully inspire you. This one is a really, really, really good reader. And look at that, I love that. I love, 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 love. Thank you for body diversity. Thank you. Queen of Wands. She's one of my favorite Queens of Wands of all time. Like, yes, love it. So that was fifth Spirit Tarot. All right, next is going to be my Zombie Tarot. I've said it before, so I won't spend too much time talking about it, but I use this deck for interpersonal relationships because we naturally have the zombies against the humans. I think it's very easy for people to be able to tell others' motivations when they're reading with this deck. But this deck is cheeky, this deck is fun, this deck is way, way smarter than what people give it credit for. I do not think that this is a kitschy deck. If anything, I would consider this to be one of the most serious decks in my collection, point blank period. I couldn't exist without this deck. I really couldn't. This is a very invaluable tool for me when I'm reading for other people, but when I'm reading for myself as well. And so I just think it's an important reader in my collection. So even though it's a little silly, I wouldn't count this one out. It's totally, absolutely worth giving a second look to. So that was the Zombie Tarot. I got a lot of mass markets in this group. And a deck that I like to use with the Zombie Tarot a lot is going to be my surrender cards. So when I'm able to see very clearly the relationship or relational dynamics between me and another person, I like to kind of have like a focus point at the end of the reading to tell me what to do. And a lot of these cards are in relation to yourself, like surrender to joy or surrender fear, surrender to play. But there are a lot of cards that actually mention other people as well. So like kind of implicitly, I could see how obsessive thinking could be about another person. Surrender to trust could be about another person. Surrender your desire to control people. And oftentimes when I pair this deck with the Zombie Tarot, cards like this are the ones that do pop up. I love this deck with my whole heart and soul. Definitely one of my favorite oracles of all time. All right, next I have like the only two decks in this bunch that are really kind of like darker in tones that I use during the darker half of the year. And that is going to be, this one is going to be the first one. And this is the Broken Mirror Tarot. I don't ever see this one on YouTube. This is another one that my best friend bought me because it reminded her of stained glass. Let me make sure that I have it in the right. There we go. And I am going to zoom in just a tiny bit because I know it's really hard to see the titles on this. So if you look down here, this one is actually the Death. So I'm going to read them as I go. So that was the Death. This is the Chariot. Page of Cups. 8 of Cups. 6 of Coins. 8 of Wands. There we go. 9 of Cups. Very beautiful. So I kind of like to use this on like the darkest of the nights. When I'm not feeling so sad that I need like a lift me up, but I'm willing to kind of sit in this kind of dark, weird space. So this was the Broken Mirror Tarot. Here are the backs because I never see this on YouTube. And then here are the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful edges. This is the Emerald Edition. It has a very nice loaning cardstock. All right, next I have the Out of Hand Tarot. I have the Pocket Edition. I do think this one tends to be a little bit more tonal in nature, like dark tonal in nature. I like this deck because it reminds me to get out and do shit. I think during the winter, it's harder for me to leave the house. It's a little harder for me to be engaged with other people. And so this is a deck that reminds me in a very quintessential way that it's my responsibility to go out and actually live my life. This is one that I keep talking about. I just made my top 10 tarot deck list, so I can film that video soon. And I think that it probably is right for me to include this one on there too. So I might have to do a little bit of shuffling of numbers. Maybe it's not on the top 10 deck list of all time, but it is my current deck crush, because it just so beautifully aligns with my philosophy of get out there and work, you know, get out there and make it happen. So this was the Out of Hand Tarot. I have the small pocket edition, which is still in print. All right, next, let me go ahead and grab some of the more pastel kind of watery decks. So I'll go ahead and pull the Mystical Dream Tarot. I have edged this one in like this nice lavender color. I know that this deck doesn't get a lot of love on YouTube because it is a more difficult deck to work with, but this deck is absolutely one of my favorites. It's a harder reader, but it's one that I tend to use for grief work. And so I don't mind that it's a more difficult reader, that like the Ace of Cups has two people. Like, that's kind of crazy. Like, what's going on there? I don't mind that. I don't mind that I have to think like, how does this relate to the Three of Pentacles? Because it allows me to go deeper within myself and to investigate the folds that are surrounding some of the darker feelings that I'm holding. So she's a crowd favorite over here for sure. That was the Mystical Dream Tarot. Another watery one I want to show. This one is new to my collection, so we don't have much use together, but I'm going to pair her with Mystical Dreams. Look at that insight. And this is the Hidden Worlds Oracle. See, you probably heard me hesitate because I had to think about it because it's brand new. I think there's something really beautiful about being lost in a world like this. During the darker half of the year, I do tend to read a lot of fantasy books. It's one of my favorite comfort ways to kind of escape what's going on internally within me. And so cards like this, the Mirror, other lives, past lives, dimensional lives, you know, this could just be a depiction of the mirror, but instead it's a mirror that's within a forest. Like, why is that? And so it's something that really transports you into another portal, into another world. And I find that to be deeply, deeply compelling. So as I work with this deck, I will report back to y'all and tell y'all how it goes. But as for now, I can't wait to get some quality time with this deck. Just take enough time to get to know it. It does have portrait cards too. So let me go ahead and find. Some of the cards are shaped this way. I just have them shuffled so that I didn't have to keep turning them. But I did want to give you that heads up because I know for some people the different dimensions really bothers them. That was Oracle of the Hidden Worlds in this like nice little bag. Doesn't it remind you of like dreams? Like a pillow. All right, next I have another one that's a little bit watery that I like to use for deeper work. And this is going to be the Dream Enchantress Tarot. I have edged mine in this teal color to match the backs. I like this deck a lot, even though the artwork has been drawn with a little bit of a male gaze, I find. I wanted this deck for an extremely long time, and I actually forgot the name of it. I took it off my wish list because I convinced myself that I didn't need it because I had the Mystical Dream, and I was just very concerned about having overlap in my collection. This is actually a wonderful deck to have at the darker time of the year because it is both watery and it's also airy. So it allows me to tap into that kind of emotional state, but once again, I heavily associate the winter with that air element. And so it allows me to still feel, but still maintain kind of like a safe and respectful distance away from it. I love her, she's beautiful. It's a little bit kooky, a little bit weird. I love all the familiars in the knights. I just think it's so cool. Like, are we writing a cockroach? Are we writing a beetle? Like, why are we writing that? Like, thank you, Page of Pentacles. That's so cool. Look at this, the 10 of Pentacles, beautiful. I like this fine artwork. I find it to be just really visually interesting and compelling. So this was the Dream Enchantress Tarot. All right, next I'm going to hit upon some other decks that have some pastel colors. Let's go ahead and grab this one. And this is my Magic Makers Tarot. I'm definitely going to scoot in a little bit so you can see the detailing on this. There we go. I love the detailing on this so much. So it goes back to the concept of I like to take a lot of time to be able to sit with deeper artwork during the darker months. This is a really fantastic reader. It forces me to slow down. I want to read with this deck more than I oftentimes can, because as a matter of fact, this is a deck that demands a lot of attention for me. So sometimes I want to pull it for a client, but sometimes I'm not in the headspace to be able to absorb all that it is trying to convey to me. And so for that reason, it actually kind of makes it a little bit more special, because I like to take the time to get to know it on a more intimate level, but I don't always have the chance to do that. So I actually oftentimes pair this deck with another one, and I do not have the name for this. So I'm so sorry I'm giving you a collection video and I don't know the name of this deck, but it was gifted to me by someone and she didn't know either. And the backs just say tarot cards. So if you know the name of this deck, please let me know. I think she picked it up from Barnes & Noble. And I like to pair these two together because it allows me the opportunity to still work with the very detail-rich artwork of the Magic Makers Tarot, but be able to work with it in a more accessible way. So I do show how I use these decks together in my 5 ways I deepen my tarot readings video. So I'll leave a link in the description box below to that one in case you are interested. But this was the Magic Makers Tarot with the very generically named tarot cards. So if you do know the name of it, please let me know. I'm very eager to give credit to the creator if I can find out who they are. All right, and then another pastel one, which y'all are probably gonna think I'm crazy for including it here, because this is definitely very springy, but I use it during the early spring. This is my Squid Cake Tarot. I like using this a lot for just little bops of color. When it's really dark outside, it's nice to have the squid cake there to remind you to kind of lighten up a little bit. It's a very playful deck, it's very youthful, it's very enthusiastic. When I first got this deck, it was my absolute deck crush. I read with this exclusively for several months. And so it's time for it to come back to my practice. But the guidebook really is as good as what everyone says. So for example, this is for batons. If you're learning Marseille, I think it's a beautiful deck for that. So I'll go ahead and show you the guidebook if you want to pause it, but you can actually see that visually it refers to the artwork, so that it makes the pips in the Marseille very meaningful. You can actually look at the artwork and be able to memorize for yourself this Marseille system based off of what is being portrayed in the card. So this was Squid Cake Tarot, which I can never like resist shuffling when I get my hands. I love a small deck. I have small hands, so I love a small deck. All right, next I have another one that I use for more deeper work, and this is going to be the Into the Lonely Woods Oracle. I love the fact that we have moonflowers on the back of this. That makes it incredibly special to me. I got this deck during a really hard time last year, and even though I only used it a few times, I feel like the readings that I got with it were so loving and so supportive. And so I haven't been in a space to where this is the kind of energy that I necessarily need, which I think is a good thing, you know? I'm not at a point to where a lot of massive things are ending in my life. So this is a deck used primarily for those endings and those beginnings, those passages of time, to help support you so that you don't feel that loneliness. Really love the artwork for this one. There are others like you, very supportive. Your inner light will guide you. The consolations of isolation. Wow. So that was in the Into the Lonely Woods Oracle. All right. Next, I have my Centennial RWS. I tend to use my Jupiter King RWS during the summer months with the fiery kind of season. I tend to use my 1971 RWS, which is more of like a saturated color, at my altar. So this one really exclusively gets use during the darker months. This was the second deck that I ever owned, and so I still am very deeply bonded to it. But I like the coloration. I think sometimes the world isn't all bright and happy, and you need a deck that is not garish, but something that is more realistic and kind of represents that more laid-back nature that we oftentimes face. It's definitely more calm and tranquil. So this was the Centennial RWS, the borderless edition. You could probably tell when I started learning tarot because that was my second deck ever and it was borderless. So I'm sure y'all remember, if y'all were here for a long time, that period of time on TarotTube where everything was borderless. All right, and now I'm going to get into all of the decks that are really kind of specific to Halloween for me. So this is one that I use in the Halloween season quite a bit, and this is going to be my Somnia Tarot. I just have the regular edition. I don't have the illustrated edition or the borderless edition. I actually, quite frankly, love the fact that this deck has borders because it really reflects the idea that this is artwork, and it truly feels like this is a Polaroid. And so even though I looked at the borderless edition, this is the one that I ultimately decided to go with. And I will not be purchasing the borderless edition because I just like the concept of it being like a nice little neat picture kind of wrapped up. I do live in a place that is very swampy. This was photographed outside of New York City, which is a little bit marshy. And so I appreciate the reflection of the water that comes back. That to me does feel very homey. But there is a hauntingness of this. It's a deck that kind of holds space in a way that feels like a heaviness. This is my favorite tower card of all time, ever, point blank, period. Yes, I love this card. Because I'm just going to digress for just a second. When you're reaching the point of the tower, you no longer have a physical body. So the tower is you being abruptly shifted from that physical form that you still maintained in the Devil, which is an earth card. And so the fact that a house is on fire shows that literally everything that you know about human condition, if we talk about the Fool's Journey from a spiritual sense, from a period of death, is ripped away from you. And I absolutely love this card for that. So this was the Somnia Tarot. It was one of my first more expensive indies that I got, and it's just stuck along with me. I like that deck a lot. All right, next I have a true favorite. I love the hell out of this deck. This is Raven's Prophecy. She brings me a lot of joy. I've edged her in a garish yellow. She has a garish yellow, not yellow. I've edged her in a garish orange, and she has a garish orange border. There's something really special about that to me. This is a quick, dirty reader. Even though the cards are very, very simple, I get a lot from them. So for example, this is 6 of coins, and you can actually see it looks like someone has actually etched this pentagram into their skin. So it really brings upon that kind of grittiness of what we offer other people. I know that yellow roses are associated with friendship. So this is kind of a reminder of how like oftentimes we form friendships out of our own like flesh and blood. And I find that to be really cool. Page of coins. I think the quartz are stunning. 5 of coins, look at that. So the cards, as simply as they are displayed, have a lot to say. I can't wait to use this deck again. I think I might leave this one out on my desk for a little bit more play. So this was the Raven's Prophecy. Once again, I've edged mine. Here are the backs in case you want to see them. If I didn't say so already, if y'all ever want to see the backs, just let me know. I'm always happy to take pictures of them. I just forget to show them. All right, next we got another one that is true to the spooky season. Let's go ahead and give it out to Tarot Vampyres. I've edged mine in red. I learned so much from this deck. I learned so much from the experience of studying the guidebook. I actually was able to snag another copy of this deck because the guidebook is so incredibly important to me, and I have completely ruined it with annotations. So I'm thankful that I was able to get it for a more affordable price, because this is a deck that I can never see myself without. You know, I very rarely have backup decks, point blank period. I'm not really someone who buys them, but this is one that I thought was worthy of that. Look at that 10 of Knives. I love it so much. The guidebook talks a lot about this death head moth. I'm having the hardest time talking today. Sorry, y'all. And I just love that it calls the attention to even like the smallest of the details in the artwork. 10 of Grails. So just quintessentially classically Halloween. Love it. I'm not going to pull that deck out in like April unless I'm studying it. In that case I will, but in general for casual reading, that one's definitely spooky. Another one that gives more spooky season vibes is going to be my Fallen Angels Oracle. I have edged this one. I should have edged it in a different color, but that's okay. I think I was too chicken to edge it in the purple I wanted to edge it in. So I actually am quite fond of cemetery images. I don't have a lot of decks, as you can tell, that feature this kind of cemetery artwork and statues, and so I was really called to the imagery of this. But I find this deck to be a very in-your-face, aggressive reader. Like, Quiet Strength is a nice one for this deck. Most of the time, the keywords are pretty fucking intense. Or at least that's how I have experienced them. We're seeing all the nice keywords right now. But this is a deck that I use kind of in moments of upheaval for that reason. Sometimes you need decks like this deck, kind of like Barbara Walker Tarot, that kind of tell you straight up what is happening and don't mince words. And so I enjoy using this deck for that reason. But I do think it tends to get a little bit more used during spooky season for obvious reasons of what is depicted on it, of these fallen angels. So that was the Fallen Angels Oracle. All right, next I have the Sleepy Hollow Tarot. And I'm not gonna lie, I did buy this because at the time that I had started a tarot tube, I was like, oh, I don't have a lot of spooky season decks. I should buy this. And then I really only used it for a couple of weeks. And so this is one that hasn't gotten a lot of use out of it. But I do know that like Marlena Teresa is doing kind of like a Halloween in July kind of event. And so I think it's never too early to step into the fun that is Halloween, to get a little bit of a break from the oppressive heat. So I'm not opposed to bringing this out now and seeing how it feels. My husband is from Massachusetts. This was featured in upstate New York. And so I kind of like, even though it's like a little bit different, when you go up to Massachusetts, there is still a lot of Puritan culture there. And so I like to see that reflected back in the cards to me and to see that history. It makes it feel very homey in a sense. I do love the card backs for this. Like, I love these backs. Like, what a freaking vibe. I love them. So that's going to be Sleepy Hollow Tarot. And then we are almost done, my friends. The next one is going to be my Tarot of the Dead. I used this one during spooky season as well as, or I haven't used it yet. Let me take that back. I got this deck after spooky season, but I could definitely see that I would use this deck during spooky season as well as the darker half of the year. So this is one that would probably come out around September and then stay. Look at him. I love the Hierophant. The Hierophant reminds me so much of my grandfather with like this little collared shirt. So freaking cute. This deck is absolutely so doggone adorable. So we have the pastel colors of the pips, which you can tell is an area of possible redundancy in my collection. I probably don't need any other pastel pip decks, but I think this deck brings me a lot of joy. Look at that moon. Look at that little skeleton dog. Look at it. That's going to be the page as the jack. The Hanged Man. Look, his head is like chopped off. Kind of reminds me of like a nearly headless Nick situation. So this one's cute. I included this one in my affordable indies deck collection because this one is super affordable. So if you're interested, it's worth giving a look to. I think I purchased it under $30. Alrighty guys, and then actually I only have one deck more. So this one should have been included in my first video, but I figure if I have over 130 decks and I make one mistake, I can forgive myself for that. So the last deck that I'm going to show is not a spooky season deck. It's not a darker half the year deck. It is just quite simply a deck. And I want to show you the Tempest Tarot. So I think if I would have put this in the correct video, it would have been included in my nature decks collection because I did use it when I went to Massachusetts in this summer to help connect me to the energy of the water. There is no reason why you can't use this deck at any point of the year. I think it has summer vibes. I think it has winter vibes. I think that you don't even have to use your decks seasonally if you don't want to. Let me go ahead and reiterate that. Use your decks whenever the hell you feel like it, whenever you want. But I did want to include this on my list just for the sake of having everything complete. I love this Page of Wands. She's beautiful. So even though this is an abrupt difference from the rest of this video, you know, it had to be included. I'm a little bit of a completionist. 8 of Cups, look at that. So this was the Tempest Tarot. Alrighty everyone, those were all of my tarot and oracle decks. So I will leave a link in the description box below to the playlist in case you're interested in seeing all of my other decks. And I just wanted to go ahead and say if you are giving this a watch, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again next time.